All rise, we would away. The International Criminal Court is now in session. Lord John de Coup Panel International at Uwait. Please be seated. We are Eswa.
Good morning, everyone. Call the matter, please.
Good morning, Madam President, Your Honors. The situation in Uganda in the case the prosecutor versus Joseph Kony, case reference ICC 0204-0105, and we are in open session.
I understand that both sides possibly had an issue of housekeeping. Yes, prosecution, do you want to go first? Tell me.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Unfortunately, this morning, I have to report an unfortunate error made by the prosecution in choosing a photo that we erroneously have attributed to Mr. Raska Lukuya and have used during our visual presentations yesterday in some of the timelines that we have showed, where there was a headshot image, and we put the name under it. The fact that this photo may not depict Mr. Lukuya came to our attention yesterday, and then we checked, and indeed, we have to concede that the attribution is not sufficiently verified to our standards and the standards at this point in the proceedings. I'm referring to the photo we disclosed at UGA OTP 00001350. And against this background, the prosecution withdraws the use of this photo from its list of evidence, and we will take the next steps, to correct any documents we filed that may also have this photo cited in relation to Mr. Lukuya, and I believe there's also an annex to our pre-confirmation brief where we have inserted it, but this we would do after the hearing. All other evidence we rely on in relation to Mr. Lukuya and that we have presented yesterday continues to stand on firm footing. But I hope you accept my apologies for this unfortunate error that I had to report today.
Well, counsel, defense, do you have anything to say in response to this?
Your Honor, no.
All right, very well. Counsel, while you were on your feet, was there an issue of housekeeping you wished to bring to the court's attention? Defense? Counsel, sorry?
The answer to that question is also in the negative, Your Honor.
Very well. All right then. Well, prosecution, thank you very much for bringing that to our attention. It is duly noted, and we expect to see that it would be corrected on the record after the proceedings. All right then, we continue this morning with the prosecution. By our calculation, we believe you have 1 hour approximately, thereabouts, yes? All right, very well then.
Thank you, Madam President, Your Honours. I will be using approximately 45 minutes of that time, by my estimation. I will be addressing Your Honours this morning on the LRA's crimes against children. I will then conclude the prosecution's presentation of the merits by addressing the charges of direct perpetration against Mr. Kony. My presentation will be wholly public for broadcast and for the PowerPoint. unless I indicate otherwise. Your Honours, woven throughout the presentations that you have heard so far has been the devastating harm visited by the LRA upon the most vulnerable of northern Ugandan society, its children. Our repetition on this point is not accidental. Rather, it reflects the reality that the commission of crimes against children was at the very heart of the LRA's policy, one devised and implemented by Mr. Kony. It is the prosecution's case that Mr. Kony and his co-perpetrators, jointly and through LRA fighters under their control, engaged in a coordinated campaign to abduct children in northern Uganda, including children under the age of 15, and to integrate them into the LRA. I will begin the visual presentation by showing a short extract from a 2003 documentary in which an abducted child, given the pseudonym David, describes his life as a child soldier in the LRA. Your Honours, his experience mirrors that of the thousands of child soldiers enslaved in the charged period. And this footage is taken at a World Vision Centre in Gulu. Just one moment, Your Honours, while we get the sound to work.
"14-year-old David was abducted by the LRA when he was walking home. We've concealed his identity and changed his name to protect him. The rebels ordered David to kill his father. Without his father as a ready victim, David and 2 other boys were then told to kill a woman in a neighbouring village. The woman begged for her life.
And for the record, that is taken from UGA OTP 00001375 at 3 minutes 10 seconds to 4 minutes 22 seconds. The transcript is at UGA OTP 00001566 and the English translation at UGA OTP 00001557. As Your Honours have heard from my colleague Ms. Von Braun, it was on the basis of Mr. Kony's standing orders that this policy was implemented throughout the ranks of the LRA. Mr. Kony and the LRA perpetrators targeted children because they considered them easier to indoctrinate and less likely to escape. Former LRA witness P372 had this to say in the Ongwen trial when asked why the LRA preferred to abduct children. The reason they would keep the younger ones was because these young ones could get confused and indoctrinated and would not think about returning home. It was very easy to change their mindsets so that they could be part of the soldiers. Children could easily forget. And that comes from UGA OTP 00000625, page 51. This motivation is confirmed by the orders of Mr. Kony himself over intercepted radio communications during the charged period. In an entry of 21 October 2002, Mr. Kony is recorded as saying that the LRA should not abduct people 15 years old and above because, quote, they are problems. Reference UGA OTP 00650002 at page 0049. On 26 November 2002, Mr. Kony is recorded stating that people whose minds are not very clear to them should all be killed, and it's far much easier to work with children whom he captured and trained to become LRA soldiers because they don't mind about material goods. That comes from the same logbook at page 0065. Then, on 29 November 2002, Mr. Kony told Vincent Oti over LRA radio to concentrate on abducting, quote, only young children who are easy to control. Same logbook reference at page 0073. Abduction was, of course, not the only way for children to enter the LRA. That Mr. Kony envisaged the creation of a new tribe meant that hundreds of children were born into captivity, both before and during the charged period. They were carried by and born to the very young women and girls enslaved in the LRA as the forced wives, whom my colleague Ms. Indigire described yesterday. They were the proof and the embodiment of Mr. Kony's plan. Mr. Kony himself had dozens of children to his many forced wives. Appearing on your screens now is a list of Mr. Kony's children provided by a former LRA member, witness P23. The names of the children are blurred to protect their anonymity. And the reference is UGA OTP 01500059. This list is not intended to be comprehensive. It includes only those names that the witness could recall. In fact, Mr. Kony had so many children that even he had to come up with a way of keeping track. According to witness 1034, that's P1034, Kony recorded the names and dates of birth of his children in a book. The witness estimated that there could be over 100 children fathered by him. Reference UGA OTP 00001146 at paragraph 117. Now, Mr. Kony may have seen these children, his own and others, as the divine beginning of a new brand of Acholi. But, Your Honours, the lived reality was anything but glorious. I will now display about half-a-minute video footage from a 2002 documentary produced by the Australian broadcaster SBS, entitled In the Name of the Lord. In it, Your Honours will see the physical state of a group of women, babies and small children, just released by the LRA in or around Atiak. Now, the prosecution believes that this relates to Vincent Oti's release of some 100 women and children from Atiak in June 2002. And while this event narrowly precedes the charged period, it is highly relevant in showing the deplorable conditions in which the LRA kept enslaved women and their vulnerable children. The reference is UGA OTP 00001366 from 15 minutes 41 seconds to 16 minutes 3 seconds, and the corresponding transcript is at UGA OTP 00001565, and I must warn that the images of suffering are disturbing.
Many of these babies have deep wounds on their necks from being carried long distances, tied up on the backs of their mothers. Local nurses from the Atiak community immunise the babies, and the mothers are given clean clothes to wear.
As these images show, even infants were not spared from the suffering. My colleague Mzindagire has already spoken to the absence of medical assistance available to newborns and the mothers who delivered them in the bush. Similarly, infants were deprived of vital sustenance. In the Ongwen trial, witness P99, a forced wife of Ongwen, described how her decision to escape from the LRA was a matter of life or death for her baby. The conditions that my child was under, the lack of breast milk, and the lack of breast milk. If I had decided to stay in the bush at that time, I would have lost my child. I was unable to produce milk for my child, and it was extremely difficult for me to live with that child in the bush under those conditions. And the reference there is UGA OTP 00000945 at page 59. Even if young children survived infancy in the LRA, they were exposed to constant danger. Witness P63, a forced wife, explains in her statement how children were often the casualties of the LRA's war with the Ugandan government. I quote, "The helicopters would shoot at us, even the mothers with children. Sometimes they would hit the mothers. Sometimes they would hit the children. If they were hit, they would then be left alone to die." Reference UGA OTP 00430021 at paragraph 86. To compound their trauma, children born in captivity who made it out of the LRA face stigmatization and abuse by their receiving communities. And this was especially the case for the children fathered by Mr. Kony. Ongwen defence witness 130, a son of Mr. Kony, describes his treatment at a rehabilitation centre after he had been rescued from the LRA. In the camp, I didn't have friends. Nobody wanted their children playing with me because of who my father was. They said mean things like son of a killer. My mother had many relatives in the camp, but I didn't know them. They kept their distance from me and also kept their children away from me. That's UGA D26 0025 0001 at paragraph 8. Your Honours, I turn now to Mr. Kony and the LRA perpetrators exercising the powers attaching to the right of ownership over abducted children, or in simple terms, the conduct giving rise to the charge of enslavement as a crime against humanity. Now, recalling the words of my colleague, Ms. von Braun, the LRA was an army of children. Their enslavement, the very crux of the prosecution's case on Mr. Kony's crimes against children. After being abducted, children were distributed to the households of various LRA commanders or assigned to specific commanders and fighters. Children, like other abductees, could be moved from one LRA commander to the next and between units. Children were forced to carry heavy loads, often for long periods and in difficult terrain. Multiple prosecution witnesses who were abducted as children described the harsh conditions of their captivity. Witness P98, for instance, who was abducted at the age of 12, describes being forced to walk from morning to night without sufficient food or water. Reference UGA OTP 0165 0002 at paragraph 27. Witness P275, who was abducted from Odek IDP camp at the age of 9, describes being forced to run away from government soldiers while balancing a hot saucepan on his head. It was so hot that his head was scarred for many years. Reference UGA OTP 0244 3398 at paragraph 85. The LRA forced children to walk long distances, often barefoot, with swollen and injured feet, thirsty and hungry. One witness recalls travelling day and night to reach the Sudan on Mr. Kony's orders and in horrific conditions. If Kony ordered us to reach an area by a certain time, we had to travel non-stop. We travelled day and night to reach Sudan. People's legs were swollen. We had passed the border and there was no water after the border for a long time. One boy even died of thirst. A girl sat down. I cannot recall her name. I was asked to watch as the girl's very swollen leg was cut off by the rebels. And with your Honour's leave, I will go into a very brief private session simply to give the reference for that quote so as not to identify the witness.
Very well, one moment. Can we go into a brief private session?
We are back to open session, Madam President, your Honours.
Thank you. Continue, Counsel.
Thank you, Madam President. Children, like other abductees, were unable to leave the LRA without risking severe punishment or death. Witness P139 recalls seeing an abducted boy being beaten to death for trying to escape. Reference UGA OTP 0191 0004 at paragraphs 30 to 31. Both boys and girls were forced to perform tasks of domestic servitude within the LRA. They were forced to perform physical labour, such as gathering firewood, preparing campsites, and carrying supplies and personal items of LRA fighters and their wives when they were on the move. Some tasks were gender-specific. My colleague Ms. Indiguirre already detailed yesterday how abducted girls were forced to serve as domestic servants in the LRA and were subjected to sexual and reproductive violence. Some of the abducted girls were also forced to participate in hostilities. For example, witness P18, who took part in the attack on Lukodi IDP camp. However, it was boys predominantly, including those under the age of 15, who were forced to train as soldiers and to participate in hostilities. The prosecution puts forward as witnesses multiple boys who were abducted and made to fight for the LRA when they were under the age of 15. And a full list is accessible to the chamber at Annex E9 to the prosecution's pre-confirmation brief. We will now confidentially display the images of a handful of these child soldier witnesses, visible only to those present in the courtroom. And I will just wait for confirmation from the court officer that the following slides will not be broadcast.
Material are ready to be displayed inside the courtroom only. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Court Officer. As Your Honours can see, these photos are lifted from rehabilitation centre intake forms and other forms of paperwork relating to the children's return from captivity. And Your Honours, Madam Court Officer, that concludes the display of confidential material.
Thank you. Go on, Counsel.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll now turn to the individual narratives of some of the prosecution's child soldier witnesses. Witness P264 was about 11 years old when he was abducted in 2002. He testified in the Ong Wen trial that he was trained in using weapons and in defending and ambushing positions. He also described an instance of live combat against the Ugandan government forces in which he was part of a group who charged at them, shooting and ultimately defeating them. Your Honours, at this point, the witness was 12 years old. The reference is UGA OTP 00000673 between pages 28 and 34. Witness P57 was around 10 years old when he was abducted by the LRA. He describes being given a gun called an AK and being trained in how to use it. He was then forced to participate in the LRA's attack on the Balonyo IDP camp at the age of about 12, fighting government soldiers and attacking civilians on the orders of his commander, Okot Odiambo. Reference UGA OTP 00690515 at paragraphs 14, 59 and 60. Witness P379 describes seeing children in the LRA who were too small to be able to carry their guns. In his testimony in the Ong Wen trial, he said that, quote, sometimes when they are carrying their guns, they would be dragging the guns, and they wouldn't even be able to move with the guns for some good distance. Reference UGA OTP 00000668 at page 13. The LRA also used boys as lookouts, scouts and escorts, as well as to pillage goods from attack sites and to carry them away. Needless to say, children who were forced to fight in the LRA were exposed to unimaginable harm, both to their psychological well-being and physical integrity, including the risk of being killed in battle. Witness P307 describes being shot twice by government soldiers during a raid, once in the shoulder and once in the stomach. He was between 12 and 14 at the time. Reference UGA OTP 02660425 at paragraph 49. Yet the physical and psychological trauma experienced by children in the LRA was not limited to that resulting from fighting. Children were torn from their families, sometimes forced to kill their parents. Sometimes forced to witness the LRA killing their parents. I refer your honours to the example cited in the prosecution's pre-confirmation brief at paragraph 146, footnote 424. Children in the LRA were also forced to beat, sometimes kill, other abductees, civilians and government soldiers. In fact, being beaten or beating others was a common form of initiation into the LRA. I again direct your honour's attention to our brief at paragraph 146 for the instances contained therein. Ultimately, children were deprived of their chance to be children, to have an education and a normal childhood with their families. Witness P275 was wearing his school uniform at the time of his abduction from one of the charged IDP camps at the age of 9. When an LRA fighter saw he had a pencil in his pocket, he threw it away and told the witness he would not be returning to school. reference UGA OTP 02443398 at paragraph 48. Before I conclude this part, Your Honours, on children, I will address the figures particularised in the charges, that is, the number of children victimised by the LRA during the charged period. And once again, it's important to emphasise that the prosecution's approach here is conservative. We allege that the LRA enslaved at least thousands of children in the charged period. And we further allege that the LRA conscripted and used to participate in hostilities at least thousands of children under the age of 15 in the same period. And to prove this, we rely on the same demographic analysis referred to by my colleague, Ms. von Braun, in relation to the total number of abductions, and by Ms. Indigire in relation to crimes against women and girls. Just to repeat the reference for the record, the data shown here is taken from UGA OTP 00001133 at page 3. To return once more to that analysis, Your Honours may recall that the number of recorded abductions in the charged period was 10,993. Of these, the majority, estimated at 6,209, were under the age of 18. And of these, an estimated 2,556 were aged 15 to 17, while an estimated 3,653 were under 15 years of age. And Your Honours will see that breakdown on your screens. Now recall that for the reasons set out by Ms. von Braun, these figures represent the absolute minimum baseline of persons enslaved in the LRA during the charged period. So, Your Honours, even by a conservative approach, the figures from the demographic analysis substantiate that at least thousands of children were enslaved, tortured, abused, and persecuted, as particularised variously in counts 15, 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23. I move now to the figures supporting the child soldier charges. That is, the conscription and use of children under 15 to participate in conflict. And the same demographic analysis provides a breakdown by gender of the estimated 3,653 children under 15 years of age. The breakdown shows that an estimated 2,397 of these children under 15 were boys. You're going to see that breakdown on your screen by gender now as well. As I previously detailed, abducted boys were predominantly conscripted and used to participate in combat. And the data here comes from page 4 of the same report I previously cited. So once more, on a conservative approach, this figure substantiates that at least thousands of children under 15 were conscripted and used to participate actively in hostilities, as particularised in counts 25 and 26. In conclusion, Your Honours, the entire body of evidence, of which I have highlighted just a small portion here, shows that Mr. Kony was responsible for the following crimes against children. Enslavement as a crime against humanity, count 15. Torture as a crime against humanity, count 19, and in the alternative, the inhumane act of severe abuse and mistreatment as a crime against humanity, count 20. Torture as a war crime, count 21, and in the alternative, cruel treatment as a war crime, count 22. Persecution as a crime against humanity on the grounds of gender and age, count 23. Conscripting children as a war crime, count 25. And using children to participate actively in hostilities as a war crime, count 26. Your Honours, that concludes our presentation of the systemic crimes. It also concludes our presentation of the crimes we allege Mr. Kony committed indirectly, with and through others, in the LRA structure. In this final part, I will address the crimes committed directly and physically by Mr. Kony when taking two females as his forced wives. One was a young woman, the other a girl. As detailed by my colleague yesterday, Ms. Indigire, the LRA forced abducted women and girls to become the conjugal partners of LRA fighters. As the group's founder and leader, Mr. Kony was no exception. He was also the creator of this policy. The evidence shows that Mr. Kony had dozens of wives during the charged period. He stands charged for his crimes against two of them, which he committed on the territory of Uganda and in the period of the charges, that is between 1 July 2002 and 31 December 2005. In order to safeguard the anonymity of these two women, I will refer to them as Victim 1 and Victim 2, as we have done in our amended document containing the charges. Victim 1 had been abducted by the LRA in October 1991 at the age of approximately 10. She would remain in the LRA for some 14 years. In 1993, so when the victim was about 12, Mr. Kony forced her to become his wife. This is how the victim describes, in her statement, the process of becoming a wife in her own words. You have no choice but to become a wife. To become Kony's wife, when you are abducted and still young, you stay with someone, helping in the house and looking after the children. As you grow, the man takes ownership. Because you live in a man's place, when you have grown up, you become his wife, and no other man can talk to you. Your Honours will note the lack of citation on the slide. Just to note, with the court's leave, I will provide the reference for this and the following citations grouped together at the end of my presentation in a short private session.
Yes.
The victim goes on to describe how Mr. Kony forced her to become his wife by having sexual intercourse with her. In the evening, Kony told me we would sleep together, and I told Kony I would sleep outside. Kony said I could not sleep outside as it will rain on me. Kony told me to sleep in the house with him. Kony came to me and he said he could not stay alone as the other big women were not there, that I would become his wife, and if I refused, the escorts would beat me. Then Kony slept with me. Kony had sex with me about 1 week later. The victim describes how at the time that Mr. Kony forced her into sexual intercourse, she did nothing as she was alone. There was no one to help her, and she feared that the escorts would kill her if she screamed. This forced marriage continued into the charged period, mainly on the territory of the Sudan, but also on the territory of Uganda, when Mr. Kony and the victim crossed the border for periods of time between 2003 and 2005. During her captivity and throughout the charged period, the witness performed all duties of being a forced wife in the LRA, such as cooking and fetching water. In 2003, Mr. Kony and the victim returned to northern Uganda, where the forced marriage continued and where they continued to have sexual intercourse. During her time in the LRA, the victim was beaten on several occasions upon Mr. Kony's orders. One such occasion occurred in northern Uganda in 2003 or 2004, when Mr. Kony ordered his escorts to beat the victim. Just one moment, Your Honours. In 2005, Mr. Kony and the victim also returned to northern Uganda while the victim was pregnant with her third child to him. Mr. Kony confined her prior to the birth of their child. He had refused to release her in her pregnancy, saying that she should give birth in the bush because he knew how to fight off the government soldiers to protect her. The victim went on to give birth in northern Uganda in October 2005. The victim remained in the coercive environment of the LRA since her abduction and during the charged period. Shortly after her abduction in 1991, she had seen another girl being badly beaten after attempting to escape. After seeing this, the victim did not want to escape. As one of Mr. Kony's wives, she was always accompanied by an armed escort, even to fetch water. She reasonably feared that she would have been shot had she tried to escape. As she told investigators, and I quote, "I did not think of escaping, as I intended to stay alive." End quote. Mr. Kony's actions in relation to victim 1 fulfill all elements of the crimes charged under counts 30 to 39, directly perpetrated by him during the charged period, namely, enslavement as a crime against humanity, count 30, the inhumane act of forced marriage as a crime against humanity, count 31, rape as a crime against humanity and as a war crime, counts 32 and 33. Torture as a crime against humanity and as a war crime, counts 34 and 35. Sexual slavery as a war crime, count 36. Forced pregnancy as a crime against humanity and as a war crime, counts 37 and 38. And persecution as a crime against humanity, count 39. Victim 2 was one of the schoolgirls abducted from the Luala Girls' School in June 2003, in the incident detailed yesterday by my colleague Ms. Indigire. She was around the age of 18 at the time of her abduction. Some weeks later, in July 2003, and still in northern Uganda, Mr. Kony selected this young woman and forced her to become his wife. The victim describes refusing to go to Mr. Kony's house the first time that she was summoned, and being beaten by Mr. Kony's escorts, his so-called boys, due to her refusal. This is what she said in her statement. "I felt I had no choice but to have sex with Kony. I was not prepared. He just forced me." The victim then goes on to describe what happened when she went to Mr. Kony's house. He got me and threw me down, and he said I would sleep there. And he said if I was misbehaving, he would beat me, and that if I had forgotten the times when the boy had beaten me, he would beat me himself. Kony slept with me that day. He had sex with me. After raping the victim for the first time in northern Uganda, Mr. Kony took her to the Sudan, where she remained his forced wife, until she was rescued over a year later. As a wife, the victim was forced to perform domestic chores, such as washing Mr. Kony's clothes and cooking for him. She was forced to walk long distances, carrying heavy loads. The victim remained in the coercive environment of the LRA during her captivity. She attempted to escape, along with other girls, after her abduction, but she was beaten with a wire lock. One other girl was beaten so badly that she almost died. I now seek Your Honour's leave to go into private session so that I can read onto the case record the portion of the two victim statements that I have referenced.
Yes, private session.
We are back to open session, Madam President, Your Honors.
All right, thank you. Counsel.
Thank you, Madam President. In relation to both victims, Mr. Kony assumed the rights of ownership, depriving them of liberty by controlling their movements and environments, imposing conditions that made it impossible for them to escape, including placing them under military guard, controlling their sexual and reproductive autonomy, exacting forced labour from them, and subjecting them to physical and psychological abuse and severe pain and suffering. In these ways, Mr. Kony reduced both victims to servile status and deprived them of their fundamental human rights. Mr. Kony's actions in relation to victim 2 in particular fulfill all elements of the crimes charged under counts 30 to 36, as well as 39, directly perpetrated by him during the charged period, namely, enslavement as a crime against humanity, count 30. The inhumane act of forced marriage as a crime against humanity, count 31. Rape as a crime against humanity and as a war crime, counts 32 and 33. Torture as a crime against humanity and as a war crime, counts 34 and 35. Sexual slavery as a war crime, count 36. And persecution as a crime against humanity, count 39. Madam President, Your Honours, that concludes my presentation on direct perpetration, and it also concludes the prosecution's submission of the merits. We thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Counsel. And now we have just about enough time to have the submissions on the merit from the CLRV. Please, Counsel.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Your Honours. My name is Paulina Massida, and this morning, together with my colleague, Paul Bradfield, we will address the views and concerns of the victims on the merits of the case. I will address the charges relating to the 7 charged attacks to the IDP camps, and Mr. Bradfield will address the thematic crimes. Madam President, Your Honours, the armed conflict between the government of Uganda and the Lord Resistance Army, once described as the world's worst forgotten humanitarian crisis, was one of many to affect Uganda since its independence. However, it was exceptionally protracted and brutal in its impact on the civilian population. Northern Uganda has been the theatre of atrocity for decades. It is a history of unrest, disorder, lost chances and opportunities which had, still have, and will continue to have an impact on generations. Prior to the LRA insurgency, people in northern Uganda lived peaceful lives. When asked about their lives before the conflict broke out in 1986, community members described them as very pleasant. Life was peaceful, and people were free to go about their daily business. They lived their lives with the comfortable reassurance that they knew what tomorrow would bring. According to a research conducted by the Justice and Reconciliation Project in 2004, a resident of Lukori explained, I quote, "People were friendly to one another, would drink, stay up late, and could even decide to sleep in the market. There were no wrangles. People loved themselves as brothers and sisters. Issues of defilement were unheard of, and there was no HIV/AIDS. End of quote. Suddenly, all this changed when the LRA started raiding villages and IDP camps. Nearly 2 million northern Ugandans, representing 19% of the affected population, were forced to abandon their often self-sufficient homesteads for a life confined to the squalid IDP camps, dependent on food assistance. A survey report released in July 2003 revealed that at least 1,000 people, mainly children, were dying in the camps each week. The high-density population in the camps made people more vulnerable and harder to protect from the LRA incursions. The camp's protection remained precarious and life became a daily struggle for survival. Threats were constant to regular LRA attacks and their continued presence. Victims faced insanity living, lack of food and water, absence of traditional community structures, and constant insecurity. The prosecution presented ample evidence to support the confirmation of all charges relating to the 7 attacks brought against Mr. Kony. The victims' accounts corroborate the evidence presented by the prosecution in relation to the charged attacks on the IDP camps in Pajule, Abia, Barlogno, Odek, Pagak, Lukodi, and Abok, occurred between 10 October 2003 and 8 of June 2004. As reflected in the victims' accounts of events, there was increased tension and multiple episodes of violence in northern Uganda since 1986. The raising of the LRA as insurgency movement aiming at overthrow President Museveni's government spread violence in different areas of the country, including Gulu, Kitgum, Pader, Lira, Adjumani, and Soroti. As a consequence, a conflict of a non-international character started between the government of Uganda and the LRA and was ongoing between 1st July 2002 and 31st December 2005, the period of the charges, as also recognized by Trial Chamber 9 in the ongoing trial judgment, as also recalled yesterday by Ms. Sims. The LRA had a clear hierarchy, was a structured and well-organized, armed, and able to plan and successfully implement hundreds of attacks against the civilian population. Not only did the LRA have effective tactics for carrying out the attacks, it also had significant military ability. As shown yesterday by Ms. von Braun, during the period covered by the charges, Mr. Kony shared a common plan to attack the civilian population perceived to be supportive of Museveni's government. As the supreme leader of the LRA, Mr. Kony had the ultimate power within the organization. He planned operations, made strategic decisions, devised and enforced LRA rules, issued orders to its members, including orders to kill or otherwise harm the civilian population. All of these factors correspond to the contextual element of war crimes as established by the practice of the court and as described in the amended document containing the charges and the prosecution pre-confirmation brief. The evidence presented by the prosecution also allow concluding, as recognized in the ongoing trial judgment, that the LRA had the capacity to commit a widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population over a long period of time. The attack was conducted pursuant to or in furtherance of an organizational policy. The LRA followed a regular pattern in implementing its policy of intentionally directing attack against the civilian population, committing a number of crimes, including murder, torture, enslavement, pillage, destruction of property, sexual and gender-based crimes, cruel and inhuman treatments, and abductions of children and adults. These elements correspond to the pre-trial chamber's broad interpretation of a policy requirement and of a notion of organization which they have consistently recognized when confirming charges against a suspect. Victims were unarmed children, women, and men not active in the armed conflict. This is true for all the victims of the attacks participating in the proceeding, and even more so for many thousands of children, girls, and women who were victimized by the relevant crimes for which Mr. Kony is charged. The LRA regularly attacked the camps, partly because Mr. Kony perceived the victims as loyal to or supportive of the government, due to the fact that they were confined in areas under the protection of UPDF, and partly because he needed to recruit soldiers and wives for his army. The severity of the attacks appeared to come in waves, with major massacres interspersed across an ongoing campaign of low intensity with smaller scale attacks. The attacks were well planned and well executed, following a standard modus operandi, the common aspects recalled yesterday by Ms. Sims, that aimed at targeting both the UPDF and the civilians. The rebels routinely cut off lips, ears, breasts, gouged out eyes, and amputated limbs. Many of these mutilations were carried out to prevent betrayals. Killings of civilians were widespread. Men were forced to lay face down and had their heads smashed. Women were forced to lay down on their backs and had their throats cut. Others were burnt alive in their homes. Most of the victims were mutilated. Some were decapitated. Almost all of them suffered injuries caused directly by the rebels or while they were trying to flee or hide to survive the attack. Victims were abducted to carry looted goods, which caused them psychological and physical harm, including pain in their feet, chest, and back. When they were too old or sick to remain abductees, they were either released after a short period or killed. A victim recalled, I quote, "They told me, carry that millet floor and get out. My mother tried to cry, and then they said if my mother continued crying, that meant she wanted to see me die. So my mother had to keep quiet. In our home, 2 of my brothers were also abducted, not only me alone. When I got out, I found my father was laying down on his stomach with some women who were also next to him. I didn't know at the time whether he was alive or not, because the soldiers had guns." End of quote. For the abductees, the hardships began when they were taken away from their families under threat of violence. They were separated from their loved ones, not knowing where they were being taken or if they would ever return home. They feared for their lives and worried about the safety of their family members, were missing them and feeling lost and afraid. They were forced to walk for hours, carrying very heavy loads. Often they were weak and injured. To these first emotional and physical tolls was added the immediate threat of being beaten or killed should they try to escape, or if they were unable to walk with a group or to carry the heavy loads. They were informed of this threat immediately upon being abducted. Many of the attacks were conducted at night when the LRA raided villages and IDP camps for food and other supplies. One victim in Barlogno explained, I quote, "The attack began. It was almost dark. They came. Some of them were dressed in military uniforms. It confused everyone. We thought maybe it was the government. That is what we thought. They surrounded the barracks, proceeded through the camp. They began to burn it. We ran. When I came back the next day, so many people were dead. The place was all quiet. There were dead bodies on the road. You could not drive. Everywhere was full of dead people. You might find 5 dead people in a house, and there was no one to help you dig the grave. You dig the grave yourself. You'd bury them without ceremony or possessions." End of quote. So many people died in Barlogno that mass graves has to be dug. Mass burial severely contradicts Lango traditional practice, in which the trauma of losing a loved one is addressed through ritualized mourning and burial. However, at the time, the Uganda government argued that the mass graves were a necessary adaptation to the horrific circumstances. The number of deaths was simply too high, and security around the camp was too precarious to allow for individuals' burials. Another victim from Bologna recalled, I quote, "There were so many dead. The bodies were put in the mass grave in no order. It was scoop and dump. It was not good. I came to accept why the government put people there, but I wish my family could have been buried at home. It still troubles me." End of quote. The victims' accounts of events reveal that the crimes they suffered from were not spontaneous or isolated acts of violence, but rather part of a planned, directed, and organized attack against them. The attack was massive, carried out collectively with considerable seriousness, and directed against a multiplicity of victims. In this regard, the number of victims affected by the events within the charges is one of the most relevant factors to be taken into consideration for the purpose of determining, under the chapeau of Article 7.1 of the statute, whether the attack against the civilian population was widespread or systematic. The broad geographical spread of the victimization and the large number of victims participating in this case confirm the wide scope of the attack. As Ms. Pelley indicated yesterday, 5,795 victims have been authorized to participate in this proceeding. 95% of them suffer from the 7 attacks charged against Mr. Kony. Victims of the attacks generally recall their experience as follows. I quote, "All around there were killings going on and so much fire burning that the entire place became so bright I thought it was broad daylight. By the time they left, the whole camp was littered with dead bodies as if they had been on a hunting spree. they kill people as if they were hunting animals. End of quote. A victim in Abia explained, I quote, "I was just inside when we heard some commotion and firing in the distance. I saw a group of guys in uniform. They were setting huts on fire, and people were screaming, burning inside the huts. Then I saw them running towards my shop. I just grabbed my youngest child and ran." End of quote. He couldn't save his wife, brutally hacked with a machete, and his parents shot dead. Victims indicate several reasons for being targeted. Because as residents of the IDP camps, they were perceived as supporters of the government, because they were perceived as willing to join the local defense units assisting the UPDF, because they were perceived as helping the UPDF. Victims also explained that it was notorious that Mr. Kony wanted to target them because they were not supporting his insurgency against President Museveni. To describe why they were targeted, victims would say, I quote, "We knew that they would have attacked us because they thought that we were on the side of the government." Or, "They targeted us because we are Acholi." The recognition of a crime of persecution in connection with the attacks is an important element that victims wish to be recognized in the confirmation of charges. Another important element is the fact that, contrary to international law, the LRA rebels severely deprived the civilian population residing in Bajule, Abia, Barlogno, Odek, Pagak, Lukodi, and Abok of their fundamental rights to life, liberty and security, freedom of movement, private property. Victims were also deprived of their rights not to be subject to torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, and the right not to be held in slavery or servitude. The LRA cruelly attacked the victims: men, women, the elderly, children, babies, the disabled, with no pity and no distinction with regard to gender or age. Those who survived had to leave their homes, to flee and take refuge far away from home for many years, fearing another attack and having lost all they had. Mothers were forced to leave their children, often babies, behind in the bush, or to watch helplessly as their babies were thrown against a tree or at the side of the road and killed. One victim recalled, I quote, "All of a sudden, we saw so many soldiers, and there were bullets and machetes, and they were cutting people. I was made to carry a bin of beans on my head. The rebels were cutting us badly. They didn't even allow you to rest when you were carrying luggage. My child was crying, and it would make me not carry the luggage well. So one of the rebels took him and threw him at the side of the road, while I had to continue to march." Many women and young girls were raped. Some of them contracted infections as a result of the rapes, while others became pregnant and gave birth to children who in turn were victimized and stigmatized. The victims' properties were systematically pillaged and burned. Victims explained that the LRA took everything they owned, including all goods necessary to sustain life in the northern Uganda's difficult conditions, such as pans, cups, and cloth. They also took livestock, which was a key source of income for the affected people, as well as other properties that held a specific meaning for them, particularly in relation to traditional rituals. Often, victims had compiled detailed lists of the looted items. The consequences of the massive pillaging and systematic destruction of properties that the victims have been suffering from are not only material. Such extensive loss and damage not only robbed them of all their scarce resources, tools, and living place, but also had a significant impact on the future of their families. The difficult material situation in which the vast majority of the victims were already living worsened exponentially. They were deprived of means to live on a daily basis and of roofs over their heads. The brutality of the attacks, the abrupt and definitive loss they experienced, and the void in which they were left as a result created fear and anxiety. Victims felt helpless and deeply traumatized. How can one live and ensure the subsistence of his or her family without a land and a house to inhabit, without food and crops to survive? One victim from Pagak explained, I quote, "All my properties were looted and destroyed. I remained with nothing. My entire family remained with nothing. We could not go back to our village and were obliged to start a new life somewhere else. But how, with no means of support?" End of quote. Crimes committed in northern Uganda by the LRA under Mr. Kony's command have affected families, communities, men, women, and children of all ages. The very foundation of family life has been durably compromised, if not permanently damaged. The horrific and prolonged consequences of the war had a dreadful impact on the individuals, but also devastated the society, eroding the solid and rich culture of the Acholi, Teso, and Lango peoples. Family cohesion and connectedness were lost. Fathers lost their position in the society and in life. Culturalization of children disappeared. Moreover, as the people from the IDP camps returned from displacement and tried to rebuild their lives, they struggled with daunting resettlement challenges and difficult reconciliation issues within the community. The constellation of harm described by the victims has also had repercussions over generations. Recognition of the crimes and of the sufferings in a court of law is essential for victims for the right to know the truth and for rebuilding their lives. Restorative and fair justice for victims can only be achieved if the crimes they suffer from and the reasons for the commission of said crimes are duly recognized in the decision confirming the charges against Mr. Kony. This concludes, Your Honor, my presentation on the charged attacks. I believe just on time for the break. My colleague Paul Bradfield, with your permission, will then address after the break the thematic crimes. On behalf of the victims that we represent, we thank you very much, Your Honors, for this opportunity to address you. Thank you.
Thank you, Counsel. All right, so let's take a break now, the morning's break, until 11:30.
All rise. We will